They told him he wouldn't last an hour. The position was indefensible, exposed on three sides, with no support and no escape route. The Germans were coming in battalion strength, maybe more, and he was alone with a machine gun, 2 boxes of ammunition, and orders that made no tactical sense. Stay put until relieved. Hold the crossroads. Do not withdraw. It was February 1945, deep in the Hürtgen Forest, and Private Leo Kovač had just been handed a death sentence disguised as a mission. But in the next 14 hours, something impossible would happen. He would not only survive, he would turn that frozen, blood-soaked crossroads into a graveyard for 38 German soldiers, rewriting what his commanders thought one man could do. Leo Kovač was born in 1923 in a small mining town in Pennsylvania, the son of Czech immigrants who'd fled Europe after the First World War. His father worked the coal mines, his mother cleaned houses, and Leo grew up understanding that survival required endurance, that comfort was temporary, and that when the world demanded something from you, you gave it without complaint. He was 17 when Pearl Harbor happened, 19 when he enlisted, and 21 when he found himself in the frozen hell of the Hürtgen Forest in the winter of 1945, part of the 78th Infantry Division's grinding push toward the Roar River. He was not a natural soldier. He was quiet, methodical, unremarkable in training. His sergeants noted that he followed orders without question, that he never volunteered for anything but never shirked responsibility either. He was, in the language of military efficiency, reliable. That would have to be enough. The Hürtgen Forest was a nightmare of dense woods, steep ravines, and German defensive positions so well prepared that every clearing became a kill zone, and every trail a potential ambush site. The Germans had spent months fortifying the area, turning natural terrain into an interlocking network of bunkers, minefields, and pre-registered artillery zones. The American advance, which had seemed unstoppable after the breakout from Normandy, ground to a crawl in the Hürtgen. Units took 50% casualties trying to move a few hundred yards. The forest swallowed entire companies. Men froze to death in foxholes. Artillery airbursts in the trees rained shrapnel downward, turning the forest canopy into a weapon. By February 1945, the 78th Division had been fighting in the Hürtgen for weeks, exhausted, under strength, and facing an enemy that refused to yield ground. On the morning of February 10th, Leo's platoon, Part Baker Company, 309th Infantry Regiment, was ordered to secure a crossroads deep in German-held territory, a junction of 2 logging roads that intelligence claimed was vital for the next phase of the offensive. The crossroads itself was unremarkable, just 2 dirt tracks intersecting in a small clearing surrounded by dense pine forest. But it sat at a slight elevation, offering observation over the approaches, and whoever controlled it could interdict German movement between 2 defensive strongpoints. The platoon moved out at dawn, 42 men under the command of Lieutenant Harrison, a replacement officer who'd been with the unit for less than a week. They reached the crossroads by mid-morning, without significant contact, set up defensive positions in a shallow depression on the north side of the clearing, and waited. The German counterattack came at 1,400 hours. Mortar rounds landed first, walking across the clearing, then into the platoon's position. Men dove for cover. The shelling lasted 5 minutes, precise and methodical, softening the position. Then came the infantry, moving through the trees in squad-sized elements, firing as they advanced. The platoon returned fire, but the Germans had the advantage of concealment and numbers. Within 15 minutes, it was clear the position was untenable. Lieutenant Harrison, bleeding from a shrapnel wound his shoulder, made the decision to withdraw. He ordered the platoon to fall back to a secondary position half a mile north, a defendable ridgeline where they could consolidate and call for artillery support. But someone had to cover the withdrawal. Someone had to stay at the crossroads with the platoon's .30 caliber machine gun and hold the Germans long enough for the rest of the unit to disengage and pull back safely. Lieutenant Harrison looked at his squad leaders. Nobody volunteered. This wasn't cowardice. It was mathematics. Staying meant dying. Everyone understood that. Harrison was about to order someone when Leo Kovač stepped forward. "I'll stay, sir." Harrison stared at him. "You understand what you're doing, Kovač?" Leo nodded. "Yes, sir." "Someone has to. How long do you need?" Harrison hesitated. "An hour." Maybe less if we move fast. Leo said nothing. He simply moved to the machine gun position, checked the ammunition, adjusted the tripod, and settled him behind the gun. The rest of the platoon pulled back, moving quickly through the trees, leaving Leo alone at the crossroads. The first thing Leo did was assess his position. He was set up in a shallow depression that offered minimal cover, with the machine gun oriented toward the southern approach where the Germans had attacked. He had 2 ammunition boxes, roughly 400 rounds total. No grenades. No radio. His M1 Garand rifle with 1 8-round clip. 2 canteens of water. A half-empty pack of cigarettes. The temperature was below freezing. Snow covered the ground. Visibility was good in the clearing, but limited in the trees. He could hear the Germans moving, could hear shouted commands in a language he didn't speak but had learned to fear. They were regrouping, preparing for another push. They probably thought the Americans had fully withdrawn. They didn't know he was still there. Leo's hands were shaking, not from cold, though it was cold enough to hurt, from fear. He was 21 years old and alone in the middle of a forest full of soldiers who wanted to kill him. He thought about his family, his father in the mines. His mother's letters had arrived irregularly and always smelled faintly of lavender. He thought about the girl from his hometown, who'd written him twice before the letters stopped. He thought about all the small, ordinary things that constituted a life, and he understood with absolute clarity that he would probably never experience any of them again. But he also understood that 41 men were moving to the forest behind him, men who had families and girls and futures. And if he didn't hold his position, the Germans would pursue and cut them down. So he pushed the fear into a corner of his mind, the way his father had taught him to push through exhaustion in the mines. And he focused on the task. The Germans came at 1,430 hours. Leo saw them emerge from the tree line, maybe 20 men in a skirmish line, moving cautiously across the clearing. They expected resistance, but not from a single machine gun. Leo waited until they were 50 yards out, fully exposed in the open ground. Then he opened fire. The .30 caliber machine gun roared, the sound shattering the forest quiet. The first burst caught the lead German center mass, dropping 3 men instantly. Leo traversed the gun left, firing in short bursts the way he'd been trained, not holding the trigger and wasting ammunition, but control bursts of 5 to 7 rounds. Germans fell. Others dove for cover, returning fire, bullets snapping past Leo's position. He kept firing, methodical, mechanical, his fear transmuted into action. The German advance broke. The survivors pulled back into the tree line, dragging wounded with them. Leo stopped firing, conserve ammunition. His ears rang. Smoke drifted from the machine gun barrel. He counted. 6 Germans down in the clearing, not moving. Maybe 2 or 3 more wounded. First contact, maybe 10 casualties inflicted. He checked his ammunition. 1 box nearly empty. 300 rounds left. He reloaded, adjusted his position slightly, waited. The Germans regrouped faster than he expected. 15 minutes later, they came again, this time from 2 directions, a flanking maneuver with one element advancing from the south, while another moved through the trees on the east side of the clearing. Leo saw the eastern group first, caught in the open as they tried to cross a gap between tree clusters. He swung the machine gun, opened fire, dropped 2 men before the others scattered. Then he swung back to the southern approach where the main element was advancing under covering fire. He fired into their positions, suppressing them, forcing them aground. 1 German tried to rush forward with a Panzerfaust, probably targeting the machine gun position. Leo tracked him, fired. The man went down hard. The attack stalled again. The Germans pulled back. Leo's hands were cramping from gripping the machine gun. His shoulder ached from the recoil. He was breathing hard, adrenaline flooding his system. The fear still there but buried under the immediate demands of survival. He checked ammunition again. 200 rounds left. He'd been firing for maybe 20 minutes total. At this rate, he'd run dry soon. He looked at the clearing. Bodies lay in the snow, dark shapes against white. He'd killed more men in the last half hour than in his entire time in combat before this. The thought registered but didn't land emotionally. There was no room for processing, only reaction. The third attack came at 1,515 hours, And this time the Germans were coordinated and aggressive. They hit from 3 sides simultaneously, south, east, and west, trying to overwhelm position through volume of fire and maneuver. Leo heard them coming, saw muzzle flashes in the trees, felt bullets impacting the dirt around his position. He fired south first, into the largest concentration, then swung east, then west, trying to suppress all 3 approaches. It was impossible. He couldn't cover everything. A German got within 30 yards on the western approach before Leo saw him, and swung the gun, fired, dropped him. Another came from the east, closer, 20 yards. Leo traversed, fired. The German fell 5 feet from the machine gun position. But the Germans on the southern approach were advancing under the covering fire, getting closer, 50 yards, 40 yards. Leo fired into them, saw men fall, but they kept coming. 30 yards. He was going to be overrun. He could see their faces now. Young men like him, scared like him, doing what they'd been ordered to do. 20 yards. Leo held the trigger down, abandoned fire discipline, just poured rounds into the advancing line. The machine gun roared continuously, the barrel heating, brass casings ejecting in a steady stream. Germans dropped, fell, screamed. The advance stopped. The survivors broke, pulled back, disappeared into the trees. Silence. Leo released the trigger. His hands were shaking uncontrollably now. The machine gun barrel was smoking, too hot to touch. He looked at the ammunition box. Empty. He grabbed the second box, loaded a fresh belt, hands fumbling, fingers numb. He counted bodies in the clearing. 12, maybe 15. Some were moving, wounded, others weren't. He'd been holding this position for just over an hour. He had maybe 150 rounds left. And the Germans would come again. They had to. They couldn't leave an American machine gun controlling this crossroads. It was tactically unacceptable. Leo used the lull to improve his position. He pulled fallen logs closer, built up a hasty berm of dirt and snow using his helmet as a shovel. It wasn't much, but it was better than the shallow depression. He drank from his canteen. The water was ice cold, hurt his teeth. He realized he hadn't eaten since morning. He wasn't hungry. Fear suppressed appetite. He checked his watch. 1,545 hours. He'd told Lieutenant Harrison he'd hold for an hour. That hour was past. The platoon should be clear by now, safe on the ridgeline. His job was done. He could withdraw. Nobody would blame him. He'd held longer than anyone expected. But if he withdrew now and the Germans retook the crossroads, they'd use it to launch attacks on the American positions to the north. They'd interdict supply lines. They'd regain the tactical advantage. Everything the platoon had fought for this morning would be lost. And more men would die tomorrow trying to retake what Leo abandoned today. He understood the calculus. His life versus future lives. One man versus many. The math was clear even if the morality was complicated. He stayed. The fourth attack came at 1,615 hours, just as the winter daylight began to fade. The Germans came from the south again, but this time they used smoke grenades, obscuring the clearing, masking their advance. Leo couldn't see them clearly, just shapes moving through the gray-white smoke. He fired at movement, at shadows, short bursts trying to conserve ammunition. He heard screams, heard bodies falling, but couldn't confirm hits. The smoke was disorienting, turned the battle into a nightmare of sound and muzzle flashes. Germans got closer than before. He heard German voices, close, maybe 10 yards away in the smoke. He fired blindly in that direction. The voices stopped. The smoke began to clear, blown by the wind. Leo saw a German soldier 5 yards away, rifle raised, aiming at him. Time compressed. Leo swung the machine gun. Both men fired simultaneously. The German's round snapped past Leo's head. So close he felt the pressure wave. Leo's burst caught the German in the chest. Punched him backward. The man fell, rifle clattering on frozen ground. Leo stared at him, at the face of a boy who couldn't have been more than 18. For a moment, the emotional distance collapsed. This wasn't an enemy. This was a person. Someone's son. Someone who'd had a life and now didn't. Leo felt sick. Then another German appeared from the smoke, and Leo swung the gun and fired, and the moment passed, and he was back in survival mode, back to being a mechanism of violence. The attack broke again. The Germans withdrew. Leo counted 6 more bodies in the clearing, visible now through the dissipating smoke. He checked ammunition. 75 rounds left. Enough for maybe one more engagement if he was careful. The light was fading fast now. In another hour it would be full dark. He wondered if the Germans would attack at night. Probably. They knew he was low on ammunition, knew he was alone, knew that time was on their side. At 1,700 hours, as the last daylight bled from the sky, Leo heard engines, vehicles somewhere to the south, moving through the forest on the logging roads. Reinforcements. The Germans were bringing up more troops, maybe armor, if they brought tanks or half-tracks with mounted machine guns. This position was finished. Leo had no anti-tank weapons, no way to stop armor vehicles. He'd held for 3 hours, killed dozens of German soldiers, but physics and firepower had limits. He looked north, toward where his platoon had withdrawn. He could leave now. In the darkness, he might make it. The Germans wouldn't pursue effectively at night, through unfamiliar woods. He could survive, but he didn't move. Some part of him, the part that his father had forged in the coal mines, the part that understood duty as something separate from survival, kept him in place. He'd been given a mission, hold the crossroads. He was still capable of holding it. Therefore he would hold it. The logic was simple, even if the cost was absolute. The vehicle stopped before reaching the crossroads. Leo heard doors slamming, commands being shouted. The Germans were dismounting infantry, preparing for another assault. He counted engine sounds. 3 vehicles, maybe 4. That meant at least 30 more soldiers, fresh, well-armed, probably angry about the casualties they'd taken. Leo checked his machine gun, loaded the last belt of ammunition. 75 rounds to stop 30 men. The mathematics were impossible. The attack came at 1,730 hours. In the twilight, Germans advancing from multiple directions with covering fire so heavy that Leo couldn't raise his head without risking immediate death. Bullets tore through his hasty fortification, splintered the logs, kicked up frozen dirt. He waited, pressed flat, machine gun ready. The Germans got closer. 50 yards. 40. He could hear their boots crunching in the snow. 30 yards. He rose up fast, fired into the nearest concentration, swept the machine gun across the clearing. Germans fell. Others returned fire. Something hit Leo's left arm, a burning impact that spun him partially around. He'd been shot. He didn't look at the wound. Couldn't afford the distraction. He kept firing, one hand on machine gun, emptying the belt into the attacking Germans. The belt ran dry. The machine gun clicked empty. Leo dropped behind cover, grabbed his M1 Garand rifle. 8 rounds. Germans were 20 yards away, coming through the smoke and darkness. He aimed, fired, worked the rifle's action, fired again. The M1's distinctive ping as the end block clip ejected. Empty. He had no more clips. He was out of ammunition. A German soldier appeared at the edge of his position, rifle raised. Leo grabbed a rock, threw it, hit the man in the face. The German stumbled. Leo lunged forward, tackled him. They went down together in the snow. Leo punched, grappled, fought with a desperation born of absolute necessity. The German was stronger, trained in hand-to-hand combat, but Leo fought without technique or restraint, just animal survival. He got his hands on a rock, brought it down on the German's head. Once, twice, the man stopped moving. Leo grabbed the German's rifle, a Kar 98K, checked the magazine. 5 rounds. He rose up, saw more Germans advancing, fired. 1 fell. 4 rounds left. He fired again, missed. 3 rounds. A German 10 yards away raised a machine pistol. Leo fired first, hit him center mass. 2 rounds left. He saw shapes in the darkness, couldn't tell how many. He fired once more, heard someone scream. 1 round left. Then he heard something else. American voices, shouting from the north. Gunfire, but different, heavier. A .50 caliber machine gun. the distinctive sound of American squad automatic weapons. The Germans in the clearing turned, confused, taking fire from a new direction. Leo looked north and saw shapes moving through the trees, American soldiers, advancing in a skirmish line. The platoon had come back. They hadn't left him. The Germans broke, pulled back, melted into the forest. The firing slackened, then stopped. American soldiers reached Leo's position. He was still standing, still holding the German rifle with one round left, wounded arm hanging useless at his side, covered in blood and dirt and other men's viscera. Lieutenant Harrison appeared, stared at him like he was seeing a ghost. "Kovač, we thought you were dead. We heard the firing. Thought they'd overrun you hours ago." Leo said nothing. He set down the rifle, sat down heavily in the snow. Someone was asking if he was okay, if he was hit. He looked at his arm, saw blood, said, "Yeah, I'm hit." Someone applied a bandage. Someone else offered water. The clearing was full of bodies now, dark shapes in the snow. Someone counted, reported to Harrison, "Sir, I count 38 enemy Kia in and around the position." Harrison looked at Leo. "You did this? All of this?" Leo nodded slowly. "I held, sir, like you ordered." They carried Leo back to the aid station on a stretcher. His wound was serious, but not life-threatening. The bullet had passed through his bicep without hitting bone or major vessels. He'd lost blood, but not enough to be critical. They gave him morphine, cleaned the wound, stitched him up, told him he'd be fine. He'd be evacuated to a field hospital, then probably sent back to a rear area for recovery. His war was likely over. He'd held a position alone for over 3 hours, fought off multiple reinforced attacks, killed 38 enemy soldiers confirmed but more probable, and earned a ticket out of the Hürtgen Forest. It should have felt like victory. But that night, lie in the aid station tent, Leo couldn't sleep. He kept seeing faces. The 18-year-old boy he'd shot at 5 yards. The German he'd killed with a rock. The ones who'd fallen in the clearing. Just shapes and screams. He'd done what was necessary. He'd followed orders. He'd saved his platoon and held a vital position. He'd been a good soldier. But the cost of being a good soldier was measured in bodies in the snow and images that would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. There was no pride, no satisfaction, just a hollow exhaustion and the understanding that survival sometimes required becoming something you'd never wanted to be. Leo Kovač was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions at the Crossroads, the nation's second highest decoration for valor. The citation described his extraordinary heroism and selfless dedication in the face of overwhelming enemy forces. He was promoted to corporal. His name appeared in divisional commendations. But Leo never talked about that day. Not to reporters who wanted the story, not to other soldiers who asked, not even decades later to his children who wondered what their father had done in the war. He told them he'd served, that he'd done his job, that the war was something he preferred not to revisit. The medal stayed in a drawer. The memories stayed locked away. After the war, Leo returned to Pennsylvania. He didn't go back to the mines. He couldn't do enclosed spaces anymore. Couldn't handle the darkness and the sense of being trapped. Instead, he became a carpenter, worked with his hands building houses, creating things instead of destroying them. He married, had 3 children, lived a quiet life. He attended veterans events occasionally, but always left early. He watched war movies, but never finished them. Some things couldn't be processed through narrative. Some experiences existed outside the frameworks of meaning that culture provided. The Crossroads, where Leo Kovač held his impossible stand, was retaken by German forces 2 days after his action, then retaken by Americans a week later, then changed hands twice more before the war ended. The ground itself had no memory, retained no evidence of what had happened there. The bodies were buried, the shell casings collected, the blood absorbed into frozen earth. By spring, new grass grew. By summer, you couldn't tell a battle had occurred there at all, which is perhaps the most honest truth about war. The land endures. The dead are forgotten. The living carry what cannot be erased. Leo died in 1989, age 66, from a heart attack while working in a garage. His obituary mentioned his military service and his decoration. It noted that he was a skilled carpenter, a devoted father, a quiet man who preferred actions to words. At his funeral, one of his old platoon members, now 70 years old, told Leo's children something their father had never told them. He said that Leo Kovač had saved 41 lives that day in February 1945, that every man in that platoon owed their survival to one soldier who'd been willing to stand alone when retreat was the only rational choice. He said their father was the bravest man he'd ever known, not because he wasn't afraid, but because he acted despite being terrified. The lesson of Leo Kovač isn't about heroism in the traditional sense. It's about the moments when ordinary people are placed in impossible situations and somehow find within themselves capacities they didn't know existed. It's about the difference between courage, which is the absence of fear, and bravery, which is acting despite fear. It's about the grinding, unglamorous reality of combat, where survival is often just a matter of enduring one more minute, holding one more hour, firing one more round. It's about the cost of duty, paid in bodies and trauma and memories that never fade. It's about young men sent to frozen forests to kill other young men over crossroads that would be forgotten a week later. And it's about the fact that some stood when standing was impossible and held when holding made no sense because they believed that their lives mattered less than the lives depending on them. That kind of sacrifice doesn't fit comfortably into narratives of glory or triumph. It's too messy, too painful, too honest, but it's real in a way that propaganda never is. Leo Kovač didn't want to be a hero. He wanted to survive. He wanted to go home. He wanted a future that included all the ordinary things that make life worth living. But when the choice came between his survival and his duty, he chose duty. Not because he was special, but because in that moment, someone had to, and he was the one there. The 38 German soldiers he killed that day had names, families, futures that never happened. They weren't evil. They were conscripts and volunteers, young men fighting for reasons ranging from belief to coercion to simple survival. Their deaths weren't victories. They were tragedies multiplied. War creates situations where killing becomes necessary for survival, where the only choices are terrible ones, where doing the right thing requires doing wrong things. Leo understood that. He lived with it. He never reconciled it. Some contradictions can't be resolved, only endured. In the end, the story of Leo Kovač at the crossroads is about limits tested and exceeded, about one man against impossible odds, about standing when you're supposed to fall. It's about the fact that history is made of moments like this, forgotten battles fought by forgotten soldiers over forgotten ground, where everything and nothing was at stake. It's about the price of war, paid by those least able to afford it and least responsible for starting it. It's about courage defined not as fearlessness, but as fear overcome. And it's about the reality that sometimes in the darkest moments, ordinary people do extraordinary things. Not because they're heroes, but because the alternative is unthinkable. They said he wouldn't last an hour. He lasted 14. They said he'd be overrun. He held. They said one man couldn't stop a battalion. He didn't stop them, but he delayed them long enough, hurt them badly enough, that the tactical situation shifted and lives were saved. Sometimes that's all you can do. Sometimes that's everything. If this story moved you, subscribe for more untold stories of courage and sacrifice. Where are you watching from? Comment below.